Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Zachary Eckert, and today I wanted to talk about a book I was assigned to read for my SHS 226 class. The book was called System Theory in Action by Shelley Smith Acuna, and today I wanted to speak about its relevance in social services. So, without further ado, let's get into it, shall we? And also, too, I had to write a script out because I am not very good on camera. So, if you see me appearing down at my laptop, it's just to read out what I've typed. So, I apologize, I'm not trying to be rude, I just have terrible anxiety. Anyway, though, so what exactly is systems theory? In the book, systems theory is defined as a misnomer, as there isn't a single definition or tradition that would qualify as a distinct theory. Instead, it can be defined as a set of unifying principles about the organization and functioning of systems. However, when it comes to just the term systems, Laszlo defines it as a meaningful wholes that are maintained by the interaction of their parts. By using this definition, it means that systems can include organisms, social groups, and even electronic entities. Most of Shelley Acuna's work on the subject is based off of Ludwig von Bertalanffy, I apologize if I'm saying that wrong, who initially named it general systems theory. A more simple explanation is that system theory is trying to convey that people don't simply exist in isolation. We are all part of families, workplace teams, and cultures. In other words, systems and all in other words, systems and all they shape systems shape how we feel, think, react, and behave. So now that we have an idea of what exactly systems theory is, how exactly does it relate to social services? To start, by using system theory, it can help counselors view their clients in a bigger environment as opposed to just looking at them at their core. In other words, it allows the worker to view the client's entire personal and social system interactions to determine that the issue they may be having is not just about them, but everything around them, their environment, where they're going, their mannerisms, their actions, things of that nature. Their family, school, community, and possibly even the policies that potentially shape their access to services or personal care. Each one of these things is an underlying factor when interacting with a client, and by using system theory, we're able to address and look into each issue and pinpoint where exactly the issues are stemming from. So, in other words, it gives us a very open perspective, a very broad perspective of what exactly may be causing the issues or problems with that unique individual. And as opposed to just studying what's going on initially with them, the immediate problems, it kind of opens up the scope to look at problems, as I said, in their school or family settings or social settings or interactions with people, their relationships with close and far, so on and so forth. Miss Acuna also goes on to speak about things regarding to roles and boundaries, which basically means who's allowed to do what in a family or group system. She also speaks about feedback loops, in other words, how behavior gets reinforced or challenged within those systems. And finally, subsystems. For example, a brother-sister relationship within a larger family unit. And in the end, finally, emergence. Emergence is the idea that the whole system is more than just a total of its individual parts. So, as opposed to just branching out in each specific part, it's basically stating that it's more than all of those as it's combined together. Let's see. Now that we've spoken about that, let's talk about how it actually helps in social services. Excuse me, now let me catch up with my notes. There we go. When you work in the field of social services, it's very possible you will come across people experiencing a crisis or having a mental health episode. When dealing with this, it is very tempting and easy to just focus on the immediate problems and the person, as a whole right in front of you. And as I said, the immediate issues, what can be done immediately, or a quick fix solution to the problem right then and there. However, when we do that, sometimes it mimics basically putting a band-aid on a wound that needs more intensive care. In other words, you figure out, what can help those people right then and there, whether it be getting away from an area or changing the response to things. And while that may help right then and there, if they potentially don't change their long-term behavior, the problem will continuously come back, and it could come back tomorrow, next week, next year. As long as they continue those behaviors without changing their long-term actions, the problem and issues are bound to reoccur. So, excuse me, I'm sorry, I lost myself again in my notes. Here we go. When you introduce system theory, you look beyond what's immediately wrong and what can be fixed right then and there, and start looking at the individual's environment and how everything going on around them could be causing them to experience these issues and problems. A good example of this would be looking at a young child with disruptive personality and short attention span. Instead of immediately thinking the child has ADD or ADHD, maybe his behavior is stemming from stress or issues or disruptions at home, or possibly the systems at school. In other words, his educational plan isn't meeting his specific needs, and so he's lashing out because he doesn't think he's receiving the attention that he actually needs to be successful, or the proper attention he wants as a child. Also, too, being able to look at these multiple layers when engaging with clients is a big help in being able to see the bigger picture and offering the correct guidance for their unique situation. In counseling, you're going to come across a lot of clients whose situation may seem very, very similar to others, and it may have a lot of similarities to, most things. But the important part is to look at this from an ethical standpoint and treat every client as a brand new case. You never want to relate their case to somebody else. It's always a brand new experience and a brand new, plan for their recovery, a brand new way to basically reformat themselves and their behaviors to take care of these issues and problems. You never want to compare and, take Joe's case and compare it with Mary's case, and compare Mary's case with Catherine's. It's never in a good light to do that, because it shows that you aren't paying attention directly to those people. It shows that your attention is, jumping back and forth between this person and that person, and it may cause the client to feel unheard or unrepresented, or basically not respected in a light to where they have your full undivided attention. Since we've talked about that, let's move on to something inside system theory, which is called thinking in levels. Thinking in levels allows us to look at the situation in 3 different sub-perspectives of the individual's lifestyle, and allows us to make sure we are investigating every outlet properly to recognize and diagnose their issues. There are 3 levels that I came across in the book. The first level is micro. And micro level is referring to a personal level between the individual and a close relationship, like their counselor or their family, brother, sister, aunt, uncle, parents, something like that. So that's basically like the small, tiny level where you get micro from. The next level is meso, which refers to small groups like extended family or school groups, peer groups, work groups. And even though it's meso, that's kind of going on to the medium size. And the last one we're looking at is macro, which is the big, big circle. And those systems include policies, societal norms, and possible feelings of inequality based on societal norms, or, what peers may look at. And while all these levels are helpful for each situation, they each have their own path, and it is very possible that all 3 levels could factor in shaping the individual's issue or crisis they are experiencing. In other words, it doesn't have to go in a set list from top to bottom. It's possible that it could start somewhere and go back up 1, or drop down to the bottom, or start at the bottom and then work its way back up to the top. It could go a very, it could go very many different ways. It's not lock and key type system. It's has the possibility to go in various directions. Going on more a little bit about levels, Misakuna's work also aligns with Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory as well. It also uses levels to explore the many different outlets of the client's experience. As listed before, we have the micro, meso, and macro systems. Then, when we add in Bronfenbrenner's theory, we're introduced to the exosystem, which includes indirect influences, and also the chronosystem, which includes life transitions and history context. Reading into this gives us the perspective that people are shaped by timing, placement, and various types of connections. In other words, the interactions that you have with people or, reactions, things of that nature, basically shape who you are as a person. And we experience that from the time we're able to talk and socialize with others, basically for the rest of our life. A real life example of systems theory that I grabbed from the book is Misakuna shares about a teenager dealing with anxiety. Instead of taking a head-on approach and just treating the symptoms immediately, the therapist looks at things like family. Maybe there's issues or tension at home, or he's under immense pressure from his parents. She also looks at the possibility of there being issues at school with grades, or he's being bullied or being peer pressured socially to do something he doesn't feel comfortable to do. And finally, cultural issues, which is being expected of him by his community or social group to be doing something that he is not comfortable with doing or expressing. And when you have these examples, it helps frame and show us how this theory works and how it has its place in counselor-client relationships. Going on, there was also mention of some tools that could potentially help you see practical use in this as opposed to seeing it in an abstract manner. Things like eco maps, which are diagrams that show a client's relationship and supports. Genograms, which are family trees that include emotional and relational data. Basically mother, father, brother, sister, and what they are in relation to you. And finally, intervention planning, strategies that include all levels of the person's environment. These tools have the ability to help us move from the insight step to the action step. Now, we've explained quite a bit about this, and there is quite a bit of good information about it, but as with all practices, there is a positive and a negative aspect. Moving on to the positive aspect of systems theory is that it's flexible and holistic in nature. Basically, it can be applied to many different situations, and it can be interpreted in many different ways, and allowing you to bounce information off one another to kind of go back and forth and figure out the best solution. It also encourages collaboration and communication between people, allowing for an influx of information to be able to figure out every detail that surrounds the individual situation. And finally, it supports culturally competent practice. And as I said before, while that sounds wonderful, there are unfortunately some downsides to it as well. For one, it requires perfect coordination across multiple systems. Basically, every system has to be in line for it to work, and when you have that, you have many points of potential failure. And also, too, it doesn't always offer quick fixes to solutions that need a quick fix, or crisis that needs a quick fix. Somebody could be involved in trauma or a mental health episode, and the last thing you want to ask them is, well, how do you feel about your family in response to feeling this way, when they're laying there and having a mental breakdown because they've just witnessed something incredibly traumatizing. Obviously, system theory is not a good practice for that situation. You need the immediate, you need to be able to address whatever's going on quickly and develop safety measures and then move on to what's going to be best for the client then and there, not what's going to be best for them 6 months down the line. So, after looking at this, even though it may seem hard and require a lot of effort. I personally have always believed that anything worth doing is always going to be hard and require a generous amount of effort on someone's part. So if you're looking to make long-term changes and willing to put the effort in to do so, I believe this system would be beneficial to implement with someone looking to achieve goals like that. Like I said, it's not very useful for immediate quick fixes, but if you have situations to where it stems out from just immediate problems and the issues keep happening due to environment or relationships in that matter, I think being able to implement this system and check all of your boxes regarding to each of those things would be a good time to use this practice, because it allows you to take in all the information at once and be able to kind of mark off what's causing you stress and what's causing you to act like this and what's causing these situations to happen. So we've discussed quite a bit about this. And for my final statement, I would just like to say, coming to a close from what I've gathered, systems theory is a way of really taking into account everything that a client has to give to be able to give them the best guidance and advice about how to overcome their issues and change themselves for the better. It allows the client to be able to transition from feeling isolated to feeling a genuine connection in a different aspect of their life. And hopefully by feeling those connections, they're able to have a new perspective of themselves and the situations they're involved in. In turn, hopefully they're able to use these new perspectives to form new goals for themselves and use this newfound sense of motivation and understanding to better understand the who, what, where, when, and why about their life. I also realize that when we talk about healing as a person, this system shows us that sometimes healing has to go beyond healing ourselves personally. At times, it has to extend to our situation, our environment, our relationships, our influences, and various other outside factors that we don't think about sometimes. I feel if you utilize this system in a social service setting, it will yield positive results depending on when you decide to implement it. As I said before, there is always a time and place to use different practices and tools available to you on the journey you embark with your clients. Overall, though, I'm happy I was able to gather what I did from this book and feel happy and better prepared for when I decided to start my career in social services myself. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you learned from what I was able to gather from this and project towards you. One more closing statement, as I said, there is a time and place for everything. In regards to this practice, going over it once more, this practice may work well here, but may not be able to be applicable to other situations. It's best to experiment and, really gauge when and where this is going to be the most helpful. And as I said, there's a time and place for everything. But having this under my belt now, I feel much more confident that when I go into the role of social services, I will be better prepared and more confident. Thank you for your time, everyone. Have a good night.